Drones, fighter jets and military helicopters. Iraq's Prime Minister is travelling to Washington with a hefty shopping list of equipment he wants to help fight the sectarian violence engulfing his country. But some US senators are warning that it is the Iraqi leader himself pushing the country into civil war. Just today, 12 people were killed in twin suicide attacks targeting soldiers and anti-Al-Qaeda militants. Let's now talk to Jeremy Corbyn. He's chairman of the Stop the War Coalition and a British MP live in London. Surely the government needs all the help it can get here. Weapons and money, they are the solution?
Pouring more weapons and more money into Iraq on top of the 7,000 people that have already died in the past year is not a solution and is not the way forward. There's some kind of irony in all this that Malaki, who's quite close to the US in general terms, now goes to Washington wanting more arms to fight what he terms to be internal insurgents. Surely the way forward is some kind of cohesion and comprehensive government in Iraq that actually seeks to represent all of the people of Iraq rather than pursuing this. And it seems to me that if the US decides to heavily arm the Iraqi government, it can only be bad news for relations with Iran. It can only be bad news for relations with Syria. What we need surely is a comprehensive peace process across the whole region.
And yet there he is, the Prime Minister, writing in the New York Times, asking the American people for help. It's a desperate situation in the country. It's a humanitarian disaster unfolding. Doesn't the US have a moral obligation to do something?
Obviously, there is a moral obligation to do something about the humanitarian problems faced by the people of Iraq, and clearly that ought to be the priority. But I don't see how providing helicopter gunships, F-16 fighters, and all the other war machines that the President wants are actually going to bring about any kind of peace in Iraq. Surely there has to be an understanding that you have to include Sunni and Shia people in the government. You have to recognise the rights of Kurdish and other people within Iraq, and recognise that every country in the Middle East is a mosaic of people of different political, national, linguistic and religious outlooks. The only way forward is a government that includes all of those, not a government that is exclusive of others.
And how can sorry to ask you, but how can Washington promote that when you say they have a close relationship with the current Prime Minister there? Well, how can they make sure there is some sort of political process change there and put some, because some are saying in America that he is the problem, he should go, the Prime Minister there in Iraq?
Well, it's not up to America to choose the Prime Minister of any country for that matter, but if they decide to give him the arms that he wants, then they will have probably made the situation a lot worse. There is also, of course, the subtext of the relationship with Saudi Arabia and the future of the conflict in Syria. So surely there should be no supply of weapons to Iraq, and instead they should put all their efforts into a Geneva II peace conference that can bring about a ceasefire and then hopefully some kind of longer-term peace settlement in Syria as part of a cascading effect of bringing peace across the region. If they pour more arms in there, give more arms to the opposition in Syria, that will just deepen the conflict in both countries and inevitably lead into some kind of conflict with Iran, because both Saudi Arabia and the US essentially blame Iran for an awful lot of what's going on in the region. Unfairly, perhaps, but it's what they're doing and it's where the agenda is leading.
And of course, Washington is supporting the rebels in Syria, and the Iraqi authorities are saying it's exactly those groups that are now terrorising its own people. There's a big dilemma there for Washington, isn't there?
Well, there's a huge dilemma here, and this is the whole contradiction of American policy going back to Afghanistan in 1979. You arm people that are opposing the people that you're opposing on the basis that they one day will become your friends. Those arms they delivered to Afghanistan in 1979 eventually turned into Taliban and Al-Qaeda. They now have this curious situation where they're arming people on both sides of a conflict who are only going to use those American weapons to fight each other. Surely an equality of killing power is not the way forward. Surely the way forward is not to supply arms to the region, but to seriously get around the table and try and promote a ceasefire in Syria, which can eventually lead to a settlement. All wars end up round a table. All wars end up with a peace conference. All wars end up with some kind of settlement. Let's do it now, not wait for another 7,000 to die in Iraq, another 100,000 to die in Syria.
Jeremy Corbyn, live in London, member of the UK Parliament and chairman of the Stop the War Coalition. Really interesting to talk to you. Thank you for your time here on RT.